I'm the CTO of Site9, the makers of ProtoShare, and this webinar is Advanced ProtoShare Topics. So I've got quite a few things that I want to cover today. I'd like to make sure that if anyone has any specific questions that we're able to get those answered. So if you've got those or any questions while the webinar is going on, you can type those questions into the GoToWebinar control panel, and that will let us make sure that we get those items covered or answered. So if there's I think there's nothing else, I think we can go ahead and get started. So we've got quite a few different topics, and as I work on some of the examples, I'm going to try to show some of the shortcuts and other features that people may not have discovered. But I think we're going to start today with navigation, because navigation is something that I think ProtoShare does really well. It's got a lot of features that can help save you time during the development of any sort of an application. So I'm going to, because this is an advanced webinar, I will assume that everyone's reasonably familiar with ProtoShare. So I've got a blank design up, and I'm going to open the palette. Now, when we talk about navigation, specifically page navigation, you'll see there are 6 different page navigation components. I'm going to start with the horizontal navigation because it's pretty straightforward, simple, and really common component to use. So when you first drag out the page navigation, what you're going to see is a kind of a plainly styled basic navigation. Now, by default, what the navigation does is it starts by displaying all of the children of the home page. If you go and click this finger to go into interactive mode or test mode, then you can see that it's actually going to show you. It's going to create a hierarchical navigation with drop-downs and flyouts that allow you to essentially create really a site-wide navigation. So the first thing I want to point out is that there are some pages that aren't in this navigation. For instance, book detail over here on the left-hand side is a child of the home page, but it doesn't show up in this. And this is because ProtoShare has a feature to allow you to exclude certain pages from the site-wide navigation. So if I right-click on the book detail, I'll see the Get Info option, and when I select that, you'll see that under the book detail, there's a visibility setting, and that visibility right now is hidden from navigation. So what this means is the book detail is a page on the site, but by default it's not going to show up in the navigation component. So that's one way that you can hide a page or a design from your navigation. One of the things this is useful for is we've got a footer navigation section down here. So if, for instance, I wanted to create a site-wide navigation which kind of has all the top-level page, but maybe there's a footer navigation which has things like customer service and shipping and delivery, things that I don't want to be part of the main navigation. You can create that organization just by making this footer navigation page. Whoops, double-clicked it. By making this footer navigation page hidden from navigation. Another option under here is hidden from reviewers and export, and this is basically if you want to remove the page, from being seen by any reviewers or from being exported. It's kind of a way. It's kind of like a draft status, so that you can work on something without worrying about having it looked at by reviewers. So let's get out of interactive mode. There are a lot of other options on the page navigation. So the first one I'll cover off on is starting pages. So what starting pages is if you don't want navigation that's just generally hierarchical like this, you can actually drag and drop pages into the starting pages section. And what that will do, now you'll notice that this went to the blank icon. Now what that means is that it can't find any pages that are supposed to be included in the navigation. And that's because when you drag starting pages over, and by default the navigation has this hide starting pages set to yes. So what that allows you to do, the nice part about that, I'm going to go ahead and delete blog, is if I pull in this browse by subject, then it's actually going to grab all of the children of browse by subject, and that's because I've got hide starting pages set to yes. If I turn this off, you'll notice that now it's using the starting page, so it's using the page I dragged in. And I can drag in more than one page. So if I want to keep adding to this navigation, I can really just build it up by dragging and dropping different pages into the starting pages section. So that's one handy way to create kind of a custom navigation. Now I'm going to go ahead and select these, hit the delete key and get rid of them. I'm going to set hide starting pages back to yes. So now I've got my my basic hierarchical site navigation. So there are a couple of other options that are pretty interesting that you might not have been aware of. And the next one is start level. So what the start level is it's a special setting. You can only use it when you're not specifying starting pages. So starting pages has to be empty for start level to have an effect. And what start level does is that means how many pages below the root of the site, which is this home page up here, do I want to start? And this allows me to create some navigation which will change depending on where you use it in the site. So for instance, I've got this page, Advanced HTML Examples, open. And if I set the start level on this navigation to 1, you're going to see what this gives me is it gives me the customer service, shipping, delivery, about us, and legal. So it actually gives me the siblings of the Advanced HTML Examples. And if I switch this to put it back in the navigation, it would show up as well. And this is because when you specify the start level of 1, that means it's going to start one level below the root. When it starts one level below the root, it finds browse by subject, blog, sale books, and footer navigation. But it's only going to include those items that are direct parents of the page that I'm on. Now the interesting thing about this is, I'm looking at this on the HTML examples. If I copy and paste this, so I'm going to select this, and copy is Command-C or Control-C depending on whether you're on a Mac or a PC. And I'll go ahead and in the browse by subject, there's a business page. I've got that open here. I'm going to go ahead and paste this navigation. So you'll see it looks different here. It's going to take the siblings of the page that I'm looking at right now. So here, the same navigation, the same configuration options is going to show me the siblings of this page or the siblings of whatever page I'm on. So this can be really useful for creating things like subsection navigation. So you want to create one navigation component that works on on multiple different subsections, even though that navigation is going to change. So there's one last option with start level, which is you can get rid of it completely. So if I get rid of start level completely, then that actually makes the navigation relative to the page that I'm on. So if for instance, if I want to create something that is only going to show me the current section for the page that I'm looking at, I can set that start level to 0. There's actually a pretty good description of this in the help document. And if you haven't looked at our help doc, I'd encourage you to, because I think it's pretty thorough and useful. You can always get to the help document through any of these question mark icons. I'm going to go ahead and select the horizontal navigation component, and you'll see there's a description of start level. That if you leave this blank, then you specify the current page as the starting level. And again, the nice thing about that is that it's going to change on whatever page you want. So it's going to let you do, create navigation once. You can put it in a template, and if you apply that template to different pages, then you're going to see that navigation change to reflect whatever page it's on. So there are many other navigation components. Vertical nav is really very similar to the horizontal navigation, except it's oriented vertically. So if you need that shape for the navigation, you can use that. The selection is really kind of a jump menu. So if you want to create a control that allows you to jump between pages, you can do that. And previous next will allow you to move between sibling pages. So when I drop this, you'll see that it says, oh, this is a link to customer service because that's the next page. If I include this on a template or a master, it's always going to link to the very next page in the hierarchical navigation. So navigation is really can be most useful, and using these options can really be most useful in using templates and masters. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to delete some of these items, and we'll go ahead and let's set this back to 0, which is the default. And we're going to go ahead and create a template out of this. So I'm going to take my horizontal navigation. Let's make it look a little bit better. I'm going to drop an image. And how about a box so that it starts to look a little bit like a header. And I'm going to turn this into a template. So ProtoShare supports both templates and masters, and both of those items have the feature that you can use them in multiple places and edit them once, and the changes that you make will cascade throughout the project. So one of the easiest ways to create a master is just to select the components that you want in the master. You can right-click on that, and you can convert it to template or master. We're going to convert to a template. We're going to call this template simple header. So hit save. It converts it to a template. A couple of things that it does. So you'll notice it opened a new tab called simple header, which is a template. You'll see this little diamond. That diamond mark in the tabs always shows up when you're editing something that is going to impact other pages. So if I'm using this header on lots of different pages, then then editing it once will change it in multiple places. You'll also notice that I created it from this advanced HTML examples page. I'm going to open the listing, and you'll see that now it's using the template simple header. So when I create the template, it actually deletes those components from the page that I'm working on and replaces them with the template. Whoops. So when so that's been replaced. And I've created a simple template. One of the features of templates, and really the main difference between templates and masters, is that templates will show up in only they always show up in the same location on the page. And every layout can have only one template attached to it. So, they're really more useful for things like, headers, footers, a background for a page, things like that. Masters, on the other hand, you can use masters to create essentially widgets. So for instance, if you had a login panel that you wanted to add to multiple screens, and especially if it's not always in the same place, then you would use a master for that instead of a template. So I think the concept of templates is fairly simple, but there is one sort of advanced template feature that you can access, which is useful, and I'll show you a simple use case for it. But whenever you create a template, you'll get a locked component called the child template content, also known as the template offset. So if I select this in the listing, you'll see I've got a small red square in the upper left-hand corner. So by default, this template offset is set to not offset at all. So it's set to the upper left-hand corner. When you're building something like a header that could vary in thickness, one of the things you might want to do is replace that header on a bunch of different pages at the same time. Now, if you do that, one thing that can happen is if you've built all your content, for instance, let me go ahead and we'll put a box under here just for the purpose of illustration. So I now have the simple header template with a box that's specific to this page. Now, if I go into the simple header template and I change the size of this, I go, it was too thin. We've got a big logo. Let's make it this big. Then when I go back to the advanced HTML examples and refresh it, you'll see that now my page is messed up because my content is actually over the top of the template because I've increased the size of the template. The template offset actually allows you to solve that problem. So if I'm going to go back, I'm just going to hit undo and go back to the original size. If I select the child template content, I can right-click to unlock the position of that. And if I drag it down, right below where this starts, and then I'm going to lock it again, then what I've done is I've created an offset for the basic content. Now when I go back to my example, what I'm going to see is that when I refresh this, the box that I placed is going to move. That's because I went from a 0 offset to a bigger offset. Now I can put this back up, where it was originally, and if I go back to the simple template, and now what I want to do, I'm going to unlock the template content, and now we'll make this header bigger. And I'm going to put the template offset directly below where I want it. Now when I go back to the HTML examples, hit refresh, you'll notice that all of the content shifted down. So that offset basically creates an offset for a given template, so that if you switch templates and use one that's bigger, smaller, shaped differently, you can have the content that's used on that page automatically adjust. So again, it's a nice feature of templates. It can come in very useful if you're working on something like a website where you want to build a header that's used on every page, but you want the flexibility to change it if you need to. I see there's one question about how to show home in the navigation. So right now, the only way to show home in the navigation is to essentially, that's the template. I'm going to go to the template. If you leave starting pages blank and start level blank, and you set hide starting pages to no, then you're going to get the home page in the navigation. You know, we've had requests from customers. I mean, one of the issues with this is that home is always the root of the site. So, you know, in essence, it's never going to show up on the same level as the other, you know, as the other pages. What I suspect you're looking for with this is you want this site-wide navigation, but you also want home to show up at the same time. So one of the ways to do this is to use, you know, kind of a separate home navigation. I can either use I can drag a page out to create a link to home. I could change the styling to style this. I could also use a separate navigation component, which if I copy this and paste it, then I can open this, you know, set the starting page to home, hide starting pages to no. And the other thing in this case, I probably don't want this menu to expand. So there's an option for that, which is visible levels. So if I set visible levels to 1, then, oops, excuse me. Sorry, if I set visible levels to 0 on this component, then I've created a navigation that's just the home page. Using navigation to create a link to just the home page seems a little bit like overkill. So I mean, you could use the hyperlink component, you could use a button component. The nice thing about the navigation component is that the page you're on will highlight, so it kind of gives you that that sort of feedback that, yeah, you know, I'm on the home page. So and so it will gray that out. So I hope that answers the question adequately. Let's take a look. When I create a template, that template is going to show up in the library under the templates section. You can drag and drop, reorder these. You know, I've got my simple header. If I wanted to put this into a folder called My Templates, I can actually just drag from the listing into the My Templates. That's going to put it in that folder. To apply this to a page, it's as easy as just dragging the header directly onto the canvas and dropping it. When I look in the listing, I can see what header I'm using. I can open it to edit. I can detach or remove. With masters, the difference with masters is they're really a set of widgets. So if I drag out a master, that's actually going to just drop a movable object onto the page. So it's going to drop something that I can use over and over again. Okay, so I'm just going to check my notes for a minute here. If anyone has any questions about anything that we've looked at so far, please go ahead and ask them. So One of the next things that I want to talk about is I'm going to go ahead and remove this header, or I'm sorry, remove the template from this page. So one of the other things that I want to talk about is how you build using ProtoShare. And there are a lot of shortcuts in ProtoShare. We've got, if you look at the help menu, there's a host of keyboard shortcuts. So you can see the references to all of those. It's definitely worth looking at. They can really save you time and effort. Thanks. Well, I want to talk about a few other things first. So I'm going to, and one of the first things that can be really useful is called the group clutch. And so with ProtoShare, one of the things that you can do is you can create groups of components. And this just gives you a handy way to grab a hold of, of a bunch of different items and grab them more easily. So if I'm going to shift select these two components, an image and text, and if I right click on those, you'll see there's a group option. So when I've got the group option on, whenever I select any member of the group, I'm going to select all of them. It's really handy. It makes it easy to move. I can even double click these and set properties on them at the same time. So for instance, if I change the stroke here to red, then it's going to change for both of those components. So you've got that kind of multiple editing, which is nice. But sometimes I want to change one item in a group. And this is a very simple example. So I could always just ungroup these two. But maybe I don't want to do that. I've got a quick change that I want to make to the text. This button in the toolbar is the group clutch. It says automatically select group members. If I deselect this, then when I click on one of the members of the group, it's not going to select the other one. So this would allow me to move these components relative to each other. So when I turn the group clutch back on, you'll see they're still in a group, but I've changed the shape. It also allows me to edit the content or the properties of just one of those items. So using the group clutch makes groups much handier, much more easy to use. You can group things that need to be grouped together, so you can grab them all at once and move them. But if you need to get in and work on an individual item, you can turn that group clutch off. So one of the other ways of grouping components in ProtoShare is to use a container component. So I just want to talk a little bit about what some of the differences between a group and a container are. So a group really just takes two components that are on the page and associates them so that as you select one, you select all members of the group. On the other hand, if I drop elements into a container, and you'll notice that as I drag items into this container, it highlights in blue, and those objects actually go inside of those. So it has some of the same features of a group, which is if I select the container and move that, then it's going to move all of the components inside it as well. Containers can have scroll bars, so a container I can actually move. I can actually move an item off of the screen in the container. I could put a rich text that's that's very long, and the container will get scroll bars. You can also tell it to either always have scroll bars or never have scroll bars as you need it. But one of the most useful things about containers is using containers with states, because whenever you put an item into a container, it's going to inherit the visibility settings from that container. So we haven't talked yet about states and visibility, but With ProtoShare, using states and visibility, you can hide and show different items. I'm going to go ahead and create a simple state now. Whoops. I'm going to create a state right now, which is hide container, and we'll make the values no and yes. Save that. And I'm going to go ahead and say make this visible only when, whoops, I did that backwards, when hide container is no. So I'm going to pop out the listing, and the listing is a really handy place to see what template I'm using, to see the states that I have. You notice here's my hide container state. I can actually change that state using the control in the listing, and you'll notice it's showing and hiding that HTML. You'll also see the component listing here, which shows me my container and shows me the components that are inside of it. I can use the listing to select components that I want to work on. And you'll notice if any item on the page is associated with a state, then you'll get this little eyeball icon next to it, and you can actually click on that. And you'll notice that toggle the hide container state to yes. So it's just another simple way to manipulate your prototype. So one great use of containers, or one good example, is something like a tabbed panel. So I'm going to go ahead and open this this tabbed panel master as an example. And you'll see with this, what I've got is if I collapse all these, you'll see I've got 3 different containers and a horizontal state navigation. And so each of these containers has many different components in it. And when I switch between them, you'll see that you can create whatever you want inside of a container and then hide or show the entire thing based on a single state. So when you compare this with a group, for instance, now you can multi-edit if you select a group. Like when I select this group, I double-click it, I can set the visibility to yes. Show this only when hide container is yes. And that does set the value on both of those items. It's a little more overhead, and it can be much, when you're using lots of components, tracking them with groups can be much more difficult. If you put something in a container, then it really allows you to much more easily manipulate those. Some of the other things that you can do, you can option drag to duplicate. So if I want to duplicate this, I'm going to turn off the group clutch and duplicate just one of these. If I wanted to duplicate one of the components in there, you'll notice the state is also duplicated. Now when I grab this component that's this text that's inside the container, I'm going to option drag that out of the container. You'll notice it doesn't have a state associated with it. So again, if I'm using groups and everything's getting a state, then I just have to be aware of that as I'm duplicating items. So using containers really can simplify the use of states. So we have a question, can we put checkboxed options in the drop-down component? I'm going to take a quick look at that. So checkbox in a drop-down, there are a few ways that you could do something that looks like that. If you look in the state navigation, you'll see that there are checkbox components and radio group components. If you drag a checkbox component, actually maybe the radio group is a better example. If you drag a radio group component that's associated with a state, and you want to allow people to choose, a different state based on the value of a checkbox. I'm going to go ahead and say choose user, which is a global state that I'd created earlier in this project. The radio group will allow you to quickly create a radio box selection list. It's a grid, so you can change the number of columns in that. I guess for the person who asked the question, do you have an example of checkboxed options into the drop-down component? I guess I'm a little confused exactly about what that would look like. The drop-down, again, has multiple options. Again, this is a standard HTML drop-down component, so it's actually going to have pretty much the behaviors that an HTML drop-down component does. There are, and with the normal selection option, multiple select. You can set the multiple select option, which then creates like a multi-select control. So, I'm not sure if either one of these is exactly what you're looking for. If you're looking for something that was custom, you'd have to build it up as custom. Yeah, I guess the answer is that no, you can't. And one of the reasons for that is that you could build it up as a custom control. You could also, if you had a JavaScript, CSS example of what you were looking for, you could build that using the advanced HTML component, which allows you to use your own HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But otherwise, the controls that ProtoShare uses are generally going to behave in a very similar way to standard sets of web controls. So ProtoShare is built using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So when I look at the when I look at this drop-down menu, it's actually a select element in an HTML page. So you can style it. You can do various things that you can do with CSS. But it's still going to have the native behavior of a browser's drop-down menu. So I hope that answers the question. So, we started to talk about a little bit about states and how you can use states to show and hide different objects in ProtoShare. I want to take just another quick look at states, some of the things that you can do with them, and show you some of the new animation features that we added with ProtoShare 6.2. So using a state to show and hide objects, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a horizontal state navigation, which is pretty similar to the page navigation, the difference being that state navigation is going to navigate you between states instead of pages. So I just dragged out a horizontal state navigation. It shows the 3 values for the state that I chose to bind it to. And by default, clicking those different buttons is going to change the state. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to take a container, just drop it right beneath this, and I'm going to grab one of my images. So we're going to take this Peo logo and put it into this this first container. Then I'm going to option drag I'm going to option drag the entire container. I'm going to delete this component and drop Facebook login in it. I'm going to make it a little bigger so it's visible. Then I'm going to drag this container, whoops, on top of the other container. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Facebook login, and another nice feature, you know, when I'm looking at the component listing, lots of things start to get the same names. Every single component has a name field down under specification details. If I enter something there, then that's going to show up in the listing as well. So I've got my Facebook container, and I'm going to make this visible only when the user is Larry Burrows. And then I'm going to switch to my other container, which I can select from the listing. I can actually double-click it to bring up the inspector. And I'm going to make this one visible only when the user is Josh Smith. So now I've created just the very basics of a tabbed panel. With 6.2, we actually also added something called transitions, or excuse me, animations. So what this will allow me to do is I can select different animations for while I show and hide. You know, fade in is one, and you've got an on show and on hide animation. By default, if you choose one and not the other, so for instance, I chose fade in on show. On hide is going to fade out, even though I haven't specified it. If I wanted to specify a different value there, I could. So we've set that to fade in. I'm going to do, with the payo, I'm going to set that to slide to the right. And so what this allows me to do is to create some animations just to make things a little more interesting. It's a little hard to tell that the Facebook one fades out, but you can definitely see the payo layer sliding in. So this can be really useful. You can create things like slideshows based on this type of behavior. It's great for prototyping mobile applications, which typically are going to have a lot of that type of behavior. So, those are the basics of using the ProtoShare animation, the basic aspects of states. One other thing we haven't covered about states is what is the difference, or what exactly a global state is. When I create a new state, whatever I call it, there's an option to make that state global. And if I make a state global, that just means that I can access it on any page. So you notice I've got a global state here of choose user, and I've got a local state of hide container. If I go into any other design, what you'll see is that the global states show up on every page. Now another, so again, you can use them from page to page, and on top of that, when a user is browsing a prototype that you build, if they click from page to page, those states will carry along with them. So if I'm on page 1 and I choose the Josh Smith option, then when I go to page 2, I'm going to see Josh Smith as well. So I'm going to go ahead and again, so one of the example I always use for global states, one that seems to resonate with people, is logged in or not logged in. So if you're building a site and you want you want various aspects of the site or application to have different information depending on whether the user is logged in, you can create a global state called logged in. Give it whatever values you want. And then you can use that across the site to differentiate that behavior. So I was just reviewing my notes to see what else we need to cover. Does anyone have any questions about any of the items that we've covered so far? Oh, do we? Okay, so for the last few, we've got about 10 minutes remaining. Some of the other things I want to cover some of the other aspects of the editor, that some interesting things that you can do that may not be obvious from just looking at it. One of the things that tends to happen with a really large, I'm going to go ahead and click back here and open one of our homepage templates. When you're looking at a really big prototype, you can end up with a lot of different components, and you can end up with lots of different layers and states, and it can be difficult to grab an individual component. By using the listing, you can actually manipulate components pretty effectively. So it's really, once things get crowded on the page, a lot of times the listing will be a great way to go to get that. Now you'll notice as I scrub over this, it may be a little hard to see, that this is going to highlight. As I mouse over the element in the listing, it highlights that on the canvas. If I select it, it's going to select that on the canvas. I can select even hidden components. And if I double click this, I can edit the properties of a component even though it's not currently visible on the page. You can option select to select multiple components. One of the things this is useful for is for something like our like this tabbed panel example. You notice when I open this, I can scroll down and I can see the X and Y. So this is the location of this on the page, and I can see the size. If I want to make sure both of these are in exactly the same position, I can actually option select both of those. It looks like I do have them, but if I wanted to move both of them, so this allows me to move multiple components. It allows me to manipulate hidden components. Something else, if I wanted to take this image and move it out of the container, I can actually do that by dragging directly from the listing. So if I can't get a handle on a container, maybe it's underneath multiple layers, maybe it's hidden, I can actually drag from the listing directly onto the canvas, and that actually will move the component. You can also move components between containers in the listing. You can't move them outside of containers, but you can move them. You can move them from, you can move them into a container or between containers. There's a right-click menu here, which allows you to, send to the back, send to front. You can wrap components with a container. This is something. When we talked about groups, if I had, a large group of components, and I wanted to put those into a container, I can just say wrap with container, and that creates a container and sticks them in there. There's also an unwrap contents, so you can reverse that process as well. The order of things in the listing is actually the order of them on the page. So you'll notice when I grab this horizontal page navigation and move it backward, that it goes up the page. So the order in that listing is actually the order of the components on the page. just one final thing, and I hope you've discovered this, because if you haven't, it's a really useful, is that you can drag and drop images or other files directly from your desktop into ProtoShare, and that will create an upload and drop it directly onto your screen. You can also drag and drop directly into the library. So if I want to put this in a folder, I can drag and drop it directly into that folder. You can drag multiples at a time and upload them. So it just makes it really handy to work with various whatever files you need to in your ProtoShare prototype. So another thing which is probably not quite as obvious, ProtoShare allows you to create what we call clickable comps, which would be the workflow of having something that has maybe a Photoshop comp that you layer ProtoShare components on top of to create different types of functionality. And you can actually create a new comp by dragging and dropping into the page tree. So for instance, if I take this screenshot and drop it into Browse by Subject, you'll see that it uploads the screenshot, and then it actually creates a new layout which has that screenshot as part of the layout. So if I wanted to turn this map into an image map, I could actually click the link drawing tool and start drawing links on the page. So again, it's pretty simple to start that clickable comp, and again, just drag and drop upload is a really nice feature. You can do a similar thing with URLs. So some browsers support dragging and dropping of URLs, and if I do this, I can actually drag and drop a URL the same way that I dragged and dropped an image, and that'll create a live view of a site for me. Okay, so we're almost out of time, and I want to make sure anybody who's got any questions has a chance to ask them. I would encourage all of you to do a couple of things. First, we have pretty nice help documentation. From the help menu, you can access the user guide, video tutorials, our user-to-user forum, and there's a keyboard shortcuts reference. So we have videos on specific things, building tabbed panels, working with navigation, etc. But those are really helpful. And also, to the extent that you haven't, we've got a great customer support organization. They monitor the forum and make sure people's questions get answered. And if you're having issues or questions, or there's something that you want to do, then definitely get in touch with them. There's live chat during business hours, which you can access from our website, but there's also email support as well.